another GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe as we're going to be talking about when is it too early to take the grip, and how do you coach young believers? How do you coach young pastors who are aspiring to the ministry, who might not necessarily be looking at things with a clear lens, let's say, as they're looking at their gifts? They may not have a clear picture yet of really who they are. And so is it too early at any time? And if they are taking it early, how do we deal with that? And some other questions. We'll talk about gift rejection. We'll talk about how do you deal with people who might think they've got all the gifts, or they're having trouble distinguishing because of the way they're rating the gifts. And so it's going to be, I think, a fun dialogue. This is really growing out of a discussion, a dialogue, an email back and forth that Les Cool and I had a few weeks ago. Les, how have you dealt with that when young believers have come requesting to do the grip?
Well, one of the things that I've discovered is very helpful is to explain to them the difference between spiritual gifts, empowerment by God, and skills, abilities, roles that they might fill. Sometimes we get confused and we think that a gift is a job, or that a job has to match a gift. And so kind of unpacking that is one of the things I do at the early point. I also point out that the fewer things we've done, the more compressed our spiritual experiences are. We can't measure what we've not tried. So I kind of set that on the table before they take the test. So that's how I've been approaching that with young believers. Is, they're excited, they want to do something, or they want to do the right things for the right reasons, and you don't want to stifle that, but you also don't want to hurt them.
Yeah, right. We want to keep encouraging them on this journey, right? Rob Taves, you've worked a lot with young people, and I know you've had some of those young people that haven't had a lot of experience or a long time of belief also. How about you? What have you encountered with that, with young believers doing the grip?
Yeah, and just to, I couldn't get in. Something was going on with my computer, so sorry if I missed the first little bit. But just to clarify, when you're talking young believers, are you talking new believers or young in age believers?
Both.
Okay. So, like in my setting, we didn't have a lot of new believers that were part of the leadership structure at camp. We wanted them to have some experience. We had quite a few younger people that took them, and again, what I like about the grip is the way that it's worded. It's a fluid document that changes, and so you can. I talk a lot about the fact that this doesn't lock you into one thing. Sometimes, and especially if they're younger, 16, 17, they take an assessment and think, okay, this is who I am for the rest of my life, and it's a box that they put themselves in. And I really appreciate the wording of the grip where it talks about, no, this changes. God even empowers us differently depending on where we're in ministry and where we're doing it. So that's part of the way I tried to frame it with the people that were younger when they took it, not to put themselves in a box.
Yeah, and that's really good advice for just about anybody, isn't it? But when they're younger and they don't have a lot of experience, they haven't been involved perhaps very much in ministry. Some of those young people coming to you as camp counselors and as leadership people there may not have had a whole lot of church experience, for example, when they get to you, right?
For sure. And so, the other thing that we did a lot of was we tried to do the, like when we did it in a group setting, try and do the affirmation from others, because especially when they're young, they don't always see it themselves. And so if they weren't sure, they said, okay, this gift is there, but I don't see it. Doing that group debrief really helped other people affirm some of those gifts. And sometimes they say, no, you know what, I think you're right. I think this really isn't a gift. Maybe it's something that you're good at, but it's different than a spiritual gift. So that we found very valuable as well.
With those young believers, And let's talk about new believers now, not just youth and age, but young in their faith. If they have not had much opportunity to actually be involved in ministry, are they just stabbing in the dark here, looking for a gift? Are they reaching for something they want to have, something they wish they had? Or are they just relying on their natural personality and saying, oh, yeah, this is something I seem to have been good at. Maybe that's a gift God had given me before I became a believer even. How do you approach that?
Well, I mean, I guess part of it depends on your understanding of how the Holy Spirit works in people, right? And if we believe that the Holy Spirit can speak into somebody when they're just a new Christian, I think sometimes they do have insight. They do have that sense of, okay, this might be something I'm good at, but there's an insight where the Spirit is speaking and saying, this is more than just something I'm naturally good at. But it's not easy. I mean, for sure, there does get those blurred lines between the two. That's what I found anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've discovered that some people, when they try things, their walk away is, oh, I was all jazzed up while I was doing that. And now, years later, you might be thinking, wow, they were experiencing the power of God. They just didn't know that. So they're all jazzed up. They want to chase that down. Is this something I'm supposed to be doing? Should I be doing it differently? And you get that kind of youthful excitement. You want to help them maximize the experience and guide them towards things that would help them grow, not shut them down. Oh, you're too young. Boy, I always feel bad when that slips out or when I hear that. That makes sense?
You say feel bad when that happens. What do you mean feel bad about
Yeah,
it?
when I say, or I hear somebody say, "Oh, you're too young, you can't possibly know." I just want to put the words back in my mouth. I feel bad about that because that's inappropriate.
Okay.
But sometimes, in your head, you're thinking, well, they can't possibly. Well, maybe they can. I mean, we're not God. God does amazing things. I mean, he spoke through a donkey. I mean, he uses me, so obviously he can use anybody.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful with that. And Rob he's kind of fleshing it out for us how to handle that. So that's
Yeah. And if they are feeling that excitement, that joy that we talk about with that first experience, even if they are just, maybe they've latched onto the right ministry from the very, very beginning, where the Spirit has led them to this. Or through that ministry, they came to faith. And that's part of the reason that they were excited about that. And they wanted to be a part of that. So that can be a part of it. As long as we are, reminding them that this is a journey, hold on to things lightly. Don't grasp onto this and think that this is your identity for the rest of your life. But that as you go through those questions of joy, of fruit, are you seeing some fruit from this? Does it give you joy when you're doing this, or does it seem like a chore? And helping people to not feel guilty when they say, I tried that ministry and it just drained me. That's okay. That's a pretty good indication it wasn't your gift, isn't it? But we feel guilty about that sometimes. So helping them to see that, to go through those key questions that we ask about being sure that this is the power of the Holy Spirit working through you. Do you feel that exhilaration, that power, that joy? Do you see that this can contribute to bringing fruit? And helping them to understand that it doesn't necessarily mean that they just became an evangelist, because that's only one of the gifts, but what part are they playing to contribute to the fruitfulness of the body? And can they see that it is indeed contributing to the fruitfulness of the body? Somebody else have any other comment about that?
Yeah, Larry, I think that's the thing with the assessment is to be able to say it's not a one-off. You take the assessment and here you figured it out, but this is something that you can do later, especially for a new believer or a young person to say, hey, and the exposure of being exposed to what the spiritual gifts are creates a curiosity for them to explore a bit more that they may not have had before. And what I like about GRIP is just the way it communicates what the gifts are, both in the strengths and also the liabilities that come with it, so that as they're exploring their gifts, they can say, oh yeah, I can also see how if when I start walking into this particular gift, there is an element where there's a liability that if I'm not careful, it's not all positive. And I find that that's really helpful, not just for us older believers, but for young believers as well.
Yeah. And when we are encouraging them to come back, how soon would you say they ought to come back and do it again?
If they're looking for a number, I usually say 3 to 5 years. If I'm looking at the reality of their lives, come back after you've tried a few other things, or you're sensing that I must be in a different place. And rather than being messed up thinking about that, well, let's look at the test again. And as I think about that, Larry, now I've been pastoring for 35 years. And I started out with the old model. There's that paper spiritual gift inventory. You took it, you got your scores, and then there was that grid. If you had this gift, this was your job. If you had this gift, this was your job. And that was the big deal, 35 years ago, 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And I think it was Bill Hybels was the first person who, working with spiritual gifts, talked about the joy that's attached to using your spiritual gifts. And I kind of ran with that. And then I bumped into you guys. And, it's a much more mature tool that we're using. I think the word fluid was used. And it meets us. It doesn't manipulate us. And we haven't talked about it, but here's what I think of you. I mean, that is so vital with somebody who's youthful in their ministry, or even youthful, to get the opinion of others around them. Because they see and for all of us, they see what we can't see, or what we're overlooking, or what we don't want to see. Because, if I saw that, then it might question what I've been doing.
Follow up on that with here's what I think of you. It's a great time to talk about that with new believers who might not have a lot of experience so that people could observe them. How do you encourage them to use here's what I think of you? Who should they send it to?
Parent, if the parent is active, pastor, youth pastor, peers, people who maybe are enjoying the fruit of their ministry. I've never done it with a teenager, but I've asked people to bravely share it with a person that doesn't know Jesus, and just couch it by saying, you might not understand all the words, but you might be able to see how I'm described here, and they can still follow directions. I've done that numerous times, and I don't think, now I'll say it, no one that's done that didn't have a chance to talk about Jesus. Because you have to explain what's going on, and it naturally leads to a conversation about Jesus. That's not why I do it, but you get somebody out seeing who you are or what you do through a different lens, totally different lens, because they're not looking at it through Jesus. They're just saying, boy, this person's caring, is loving, wow, he's always in charge of things. So those are the kind of people I point people to.
Rob, can you get your people, when you're working with those young people, could you get them to use here's what I think of you very much?
No, to be honest, we did not have a ton of success. That's why we tried to do a lot with that group that was there. And so the team in the summer, because you were there all summer together, they in essence became that group of people that did here's what I think of you. And so we would try and, I mean, we didn't do this every year, but we'd try and revisit it more than once in the summer, so that then they could, you could evaluate people as they went. That was the goal. Some years it just went crazy and we didn't get to that, but that was the hope anyways.
In that case, though, Rob, you were having affirmation times regularly, right?
Yes, yeah, and that's part of being so close and in depth in the ministry is that the and even if it wasn't in a formal setting, we encouraged all of the leaders to continually affirm and encourage people when they saw things that they were doing well, and that was part of the culture that we tried to create at camp. That was just a natural part. So here's what I think of you was hopefully occurring on a regular basis throughout their ministry at camp.
Yeah, without actually just filling out the form, but on an ongoing basis, they could hear some of those key words coming up in the conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
It didn't work perfectly every summer, and some years it was more of a disaster than anything. But that was the hope, anyways.
When you are getting that input from people around them, trying somehow to get that person to see this through the lens of who is it that's giving me the feedback. Also, what situation are they seeing me in? I don't know if any of you, when you've done the here's what I think of you, a couple of times when I've done it with certain people, they see me in a certain context. And so they see me in a different light than other people see me. And so there may be two people rating me that will put different things on a high scale, depending on the situation. If it's someone that I was supervising, for example, they might have seen me in a totally different light than someone that was seeing me as a peer or as my supervisor, looking at me sometimes from afar. So we have to take all that into account when we're coaching the person. How do we help them to assimilate all that when they're getting information perhaps from very different points of view, from very different perspectives? How do we help them to assimilate that?
Yeah, it was what you said. Who was the person who said that about you?
I don't know that it's a bad thing to have, people from the different things, because our gifts can also be used in very different situations.
Sure.
So, as a leader, you use one gift, and as a follower, you use a different gift. And so good to have perspectives from both sides.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And sometimes from that blind side where someone is showing us something that we really weren't able to see if we had not gotten that perspective, right?
Actually, I only coach IWs. So
okay,
neither young in age nor young in the faith.
So and when you're working with them, how familiar would you say they are with themselves? How self-aware are they in terms of their spiritual giftedness?
For sure, they know some of their giftings because they're in the ministry. So, they're going to have seen it. But it's nice that sometimes the GRIP will bring up things that they haven't considered. And that's always a fun thing to lean into.
Let me shift the gear from the new believer to young pastors. Now, Les Cool has been coaching young pastors or aspiring pastors, those who are aspiring to the ministry, right? Right, Les?
Yes. Part of a team, an assessment team for our denomination. People who think they're called to pastoral ministry are assessed with the team.
Now, many of the people that all of us work with are going to be leaders, ministers. And so do you often encounter those people who have trouble getting a low score on any gift because they're basically of the opinion they're supposed to have all the gifts?
I find it goes both ways sometimes. Sometimes they have all low scores, or they have one or two really high scores and everything else is really low, which is what prompted my epistle to you with all my questions. Because I think we're at a new place in the church, or at least in our tribe. I've been with this group for about 20 years as part of the assessment. And when we first started, most of the guys coming in were well into seminary or second career men coming to be a pastor. And more recently, say in the last 5-7 years, we've been flooded with young men, first or second year of college, maybe toying with going to college or Bible college. and they had done something or a couple things at their church, and somebody had said, "Oh, you'd probably make a great pastor." And they did the math, and they're like, "Oh, that's my calling." And they end up at an assessment center with a letter from their pastor saying they should be assessed. And one of the tools we use is the GRIP-Birkman. And it's always interesting when we see the GRIP scores. So that's what I was observing when I waved the flag and said, "Help! Need to have a conversation about this."
Any thoughts that provokes?
Well, one thought it provokes is, what does it mean to be a pastor?
Yeah.
And how is that separate from the gifting of pastor? Because I think in the North American church in particular, we've created what we call a pastor, which when I look at my understanding of pastor doesn't always align. Oftentimes our pastors aren't pastors, they're great teachers because we're looking for that person who can really teach, or they're great orators of some sort. And so what is a pastor? I think that's even a very fundamental question we need to be asking in that context.
Yeah, I think in the article there was something said about encounters with some of those young people who would say, "I really want to be a preacher, but to have a pulpit to preach, I have to pastor a church."
Mm.
And so they accept the office of pastor, the role of pastor, when what they're really wanting to do is preach every Sunday with a pulpit to preach to the same crowd. And so they do the functions of pastoring, but not necessarily with all the joy that they get from teaching, exhorting, or prophesying from the pulpit. And so what are we doing to them when we do not make a distinction between the gift of pastoring and the role of pastor?
If we don't, we fail them and we fail the church.
But how can the church deal with that when they expect the senior pastor to be the preacher, but they also can only afford one full-time person, and so he's got to do some more things?
I know in a denominational structure like ours, we're doing some more education with our existing pastors and with the leaders that come to our conferences, trying to help them recognize that a couple things. One, this conversation, we're trying to help them with that. We're also trying to help them recognize that churches have seasons in their lives when they need a different leader. A few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I was invited into one of our churches and did the GRIP-Birkman with their entire leadership structure and their pastoral staff. And the walkaway was that they had the people they needed for the time that the church was. But the core leaders that were responsible for the pastor felt he had the wrong gifts to be the preacher. And they ultimately let him go to their own detriment, because they didn't need an orator in the pulpit. They needed a lover among them. And he came wired with all of those gifts that they needed. And so the conversation was not heard. And so we're trying to process, how do we better communicate those ideals for the church, recognizing the season of the church. Is it just somebody who's louder and clearer up front? Or is it somebody who's along and among the sheep, loving them? So that's a different kind of conversation, but it's one that needs to take place if you're going to use a tool like this.
I think there was a situation mentioned in the article about a larger church that we're familiar with, who the pastor of that church, the senior pastor of that church, recognizes that he is not a strong preacher. He has other gifts. He's a strong discipler, mentor, encourager. He knows how to build up the body. And he is not jealous of his pulpit. He has other staff people preaching often, not every Sunday, but often. And the people, he does not feel threatened when the people are so appreciative of whoever that is that's filling the pulpit on that particular Sunday, when they're praising that person or giving thanks to them, hey, that really, got to me, that hit the need that I felt. And when someone is bragging on one of those people, he kind of pops his own suspenders. That pastor, the senior pastor, pops his own suspenders to say, yeah, that's one of my guys. He feels affirmed when those people are affirmed. But that's a pretty rare occurrence in my experience. And so it's kind of the opposite of what you're describing there, Les, where he is not the strong preacher, but he's willing to let those other people rise up and fill that role.
Yep.
In the case where you have that strong preacher, is he willing to let other people do the things of the shepherding, the pastoring, the teaching, administration, perhaps even, because a lot of those guys don't know how to do good administration either. What about it, Jeff?
I think it's, again, I think that's where the power of GRIP comes in, is it's moving from I to we.
Yeah.
And I think this would be really helpful for young pastors in their context, is to not just look at it as, here's what my giftings are, but what are the giftings of those that I'm going to be working with? And how do we work together so that we're body and not just one personality that's the pastor of the church, but it's the personality of all that God's brought together. And so I think that stepping from I to we is really important.
Yeah, that really is what we're talking about, isn't it? If we can build a church like that, where if we want to say from the bottom up or from the top down, however you want to look at it, from side to side, where every member, including the leaders, can see the functions of the body and how each of us has our own roles of leadership, that it's a shared leadership within the body, and listening to those strengths that the Spirit has given to each member of the body so that we build a really, really strong body. Wow, how revolutionary would that be in building a we congregation rather than a bunch of I's getting together on a regular basis? Yeah. I better be careful. I'll get up on a soapbox here, won't I?
I think if we couch that well, we get repeat invites to churches. I've got 2 churches I've been in 3 or 4 times each now. Every time they add or replace somebody on staff, we do the GRIP team build again, so that they can see how this new person fits in. And it's not just the new person seeing, but everybody needs to see how this new person adds to the team. And those churches get it. Yeah.
So when you get one of those pastors then that feels like he has to have all the gifts, and it even comes out on his or her assessment, how do you coach that person who has scored everything high and they're having trouble saying 1 or 2 or 4 gifts even come to the top because they're putting everything at the top? How do you deal with that?
I go back to the scriptures, because Paul, as he's writing in the 3 significant passages where he describes the spiritual gifts, he points out God assigning the gifts as he sees best, to the members of the body. And we read those together, and I ask him to talk about what that's saying. And there's no place where it suggests that one of us has all the gifts. But we're all gifted for certain aspects of ministry. And that's where I'll begin. That doesn't work. Then we go back and we just walk down. I walk down through the questions of the test with them. As we know, it's probably not accurate.
I had a young pastor, fairly recent graduate of a seminary, with like a master's degree from the seminary. So he had gone out to pastor an existing church, and he had some really strong, longtime believers there. By strong, I don't mean in a negative sense. I mean they were good, strong believers with long time experience in the ministry themselves, lay ministry though it may be, but they were learned teachers and active in ministry. And when I made a comment to him about, wow, what a wealth you have in that church, you could learn a lot from those people. And he said, but I'm the pastor. No one can teach me anything. And I paused for just a moment and I said, you're probably right.
Ouch.
Yeah, that was one of my low self-consciousness moments in my Birkman, where I was just telling him like it is. And sure enough, within just a few months, probably not even a matter of years, he was pretty much crashing and burning, and was handed a big piece of humble pie and needing to reassess what it meant for him to be the expert in everything. And he could not do that. That's an extreme case, but I come across a good number of people who assume that the pastor's supposed to be able to do everything.
I think just the whole thing of human capacity comes into that equation as well. And to be able to say, hey, you may have all these gifts, but as a human, you don't have the capacity to use them all at once. And again, I think just bringing them back to what Scripture says about the body and saying, who else in your body can help meet that capacity that you can't meet because you are human. So just another way around it. And just, again, taking that standpoint of if you try to fill all these things, you're going to burn out. But if you can come alongside and find others to come alongside, you'll find you go much further.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jeff. And
I think it becomes a real good point when you're thinking church planters who are often parachute dropped someplace and they get to do everything, and why they often fail. We as the church do horrible things to church planters.
Yeah, so that church planter right off the bat needs to be finding other people almost immediately. No, not almost, immediately, as that person is looking for those other new believers who are going to be forming the parts of the body. They may fill roles that they say, you know what, we really need to find somebody else because I'm discovering this is not my gift. Great. So we're looking for someone else to fill that role as you are discovering what your gift is. And as you keep moving around with that, that body that begins to take form, it really is like watching a human body develop, isn't it? As each part discovers itself and the role the role or roles they're supposed to be playing.
Do any of you coach Asian pastors? Because even as you talk about this, I think in Asian culture, the pastor is the one that's paid, so he has to do everything because he's the expert, right? And so he is expected that he will be that way. And so he has that same expectation. So he's like getting our Asian pastors to try to help the lay people grow in their gifts is really difficult because he feels like he's letting down on the job. And his people think, well, we're paying you to do this.
We had a group of about 90 pastors in Mexico City a few years ago who came together for like a day and a half. It was a coaching clinic, how to coach the church planters that they were supervising. So all of these people were either presently supervising one or more church planters, or they were preparing to start a church and they were going to be supervising a church planter. So we're trying to coach them and trying to teach them to use a coaching approach to the supervision of those people. And in doing that, we were talking about coaching them to their strengths. You can't do everything and you can't do everything for them. So who else are you bringing on? There was a whole lot of the I to we concept getting in there. And the very first day we were getting all kinds of resistance. That won't work. They'll never do anything if we're not the hard, strong leader. I have to do this. I don't want to do this, but I have to. I mean, we were getting all kinds of pushback on it the first day. But about 3/4 of the way through the first day, which was about halfway through the conference, you could start seeing people shifting over. And the next morning, I had a pastor, a longtime pastor, come up to me with tears in his eyes, and he said, "This is revolutionary and freeing." He said, when I realize how much more I could be doing if I can concentrate on my strengths and I can launch him to work in his strengths, this will absolutely revolutionize what we're doing in our churches. And it was like, finally, somebody's setting me free because I realized I've been burning out trying to do all this. So, and a number of those pastors I do know now are still trying to pursue that kind of an attitude. They are trying to do the I to we sort of thing, and they're launching out, starting new works. Some of them are having to leave their old established churches, though, because it makes, for some of those churches, it's like he's lazy. He's trying to pawn everything else off on other people instead of doing it himself because he's just lazy. And that's not it at all. It's more of that pastor has realized he can get more work done if he's not trying to do it all himself. So that's the closest I've come to it, Bonnie.
So Bonnie, this is my context as well. So I work in a Chinese church here in Edmonton. And when I first came here, the lead pastor, who's a Chinese guy, was trying to shift a bit of that mentality in regards to what disciple making is in our church as well. And because disciple making was a program, one program of many, in the midst of being a caring church, of being a church of visiting and trying to bless people, which is honorable and good and a part of being a disciple. And his mentality was trying to shift that to more of how do I disciple and bring out gifts in other people. And so, but yeah, that is a hard shift. Like I'm one of 10 staff here, and I'm one of two white faces that are here, and it is pretty prominent that they're expected. We talk about this often as a staff. Many of them are expected to be the everything, and we've been slowly trying to shift that mentality here in one of the Chinese mother churches in Edmonton, in shifting the mentality. But it is a struggle, and it's hard because the default is to go back into I do it all mentality, whether that's the ego of the pastor or the expectations, kind of like what Larry was saying, of the congregation. So it does make it difficult, and you have to be persistent. And we've seen some pretty fun fruit come out of it, and some aha moments of, oh wow, look at we have multiple disciple groups going on now in our Cantonese congregation, and they're being amazed right now at what God is doing, and the pastor's not in every one of those meetings, and that's a first for here in the past year.
That's cool. Yeah, because you're swimming upstream against their culture, so it's a hard sell. Yeah.
But when those members feel the affirmation of their pastor, their leader, saying to them, "This is your ministry and I'm here to help you. What can I do to help you develop your gift so that you can be in the ministry that God has called you to?" Because we go to Ephesians 4 and we look, and it says very clearly, my role is to equip you for the ministry. So when we finally make that corner, and we get the people then feeling affirmed when the pastor comes and the member comes and says, "Brother Pastor, can you come do this?" And he says, "No, I can't, but I'll help you do it. Let's see what kind of resources you need for you to do that, because obviously God's calling you to do this or you wouldn't have brought it up." Of course, some of the members shy away, they go away meekly because they had too much to give up. But there are those who go away, feeling joy because they have been lifted up by their pastor. It does happen. I have seen it happen. So that whole paradigm can be shifted. I'm sure of it. But you have to start with leaders who are committed to empowering the members, equipping the members to the ministry. When that does happen, or when it begins to happen, we have another assessment. Are you all familiar with Discerning Direction Together that has been launched now from I2We? When you go to your i2we.org page and you sign in, you'll see there on the ordering page that there are these GRIP Plus assessments. You can use GRIP with things other than just the Birkman, and you can use the GRIP alone. One of those assessments that you can use is Discerning Direction Together. Discerning Direction Together is a way of helping the group to talk about how do we discern what God is calling us to do, not just me as an individual. What is God calling the body to do, and how do we learn to determine that and then to pursue it together in such a way that each of us does not have to deny our individual calling. Our individual calling nests into that corporate calling that God is giving us as a body of who we are to be as a body. And sometimes that helps us to determine things that we should not do, because right now that's not what God is calling us to do. Not every expression of the body, not every church needs to do exactly the same things in all places. So this can be a way of helping a group, a team, to learn to make that discerning together in such a way that it starts to make it somewhat easier to do the empowering of other people with other gifts, I guess is the way I would put it. So I would encourage you, check that out. You get to do, first of all, your personal sense of calling. In the beginning, we were calling this our calling, but that word calling just has too much baggage. And we felt the need to move away from that word. So it is discerning what direction God is calling us in right now. Would encourage you to check that out if you have it, because that is important at this point in the conversation when we are talking about how do we affirm everyone. And if we're talking about a leadership team, a ministry team, where we will have certain people, because of their gifts, feeling strongly about moving in one direction or another. And sometimes that might be multiple directions. And when we realize that we can't do all things, we can't be all things to all people, and we have been given limited resources, perhaps, even though our Father is the owner of the cattle on 1,000 hills, he may not necessarily be putting all of those in our pasture at this particular moment. And so how do we do that discerning process? And once in a while, you are going to come across someone who comes to the point where they say, God is calling me to do this, and I can see that he's calling the rest of you in another direction. And there's going to have to be some kind of a decision made there. Either, you know what, I still want to be a part of this, but I'm going to set that aside for the moment. Or I'm going to find another avocation, perhaps another way that I'm going to fulfill this other sense of calling. Or sometimes it might mean we need to help you find another place, because this doesn't seem to be the direction that God really is leading us in. But it is not one of those, we got to get rid of somebody. It's not that at all. When it's done properly, it's coming to an agreement of it's time for us to part ways amicably in such a way that the body is going to be growing stronger in two different directions in two different places. And again, that can be done. It's not that is not the purpose of this assessment, though it is one of those things that probably will come up sometimes as we are discerning together what direction is God calling us in, and how do our gifts and our individual senses of calling move in that direction. It's been great to have you again with another GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe this month. I hope this has been helpful. Keep those cards and letters coming in. Any questions you've got, the starting place is always support@i2we.org. And whoever needs to answer that question will answer it. We promise to get back to you just as soon as we possibly can, usually within about 24 hours. And any way that we can help you as you are helping other people to build unity in the body of Christ, let us know how we can do that, because our goal is that more people are going to know Jesus because of it. Thank you again, folks. Bye-bye.